Hello. Hi. It's great to see it so busy here. This is a story that was written a period of about 5 or 6 weeks when I was living in Tunisia at the end of last year. Um, I believe in my heart that the two events, the fact that I was there and the fact that the regime was about to fall, were entirely unconnected. Even I, in my most deluded, self-important moments, don't think I can make a regime of 30 years fall by doing very little. So this is a story that's going to be published in the next Gutter magazine, which comes out in a couple of weeks. It's called Why Nothing Works, number 2. After peering through the darkened doorway to see what kind of place this really was, he decided finally to go inside. He stepped off the street and felt an unfamiliar jolt in his gut as he did it. Then he leant into the chunky glass block which separated him from the world on the other side and pushed hard. The door was heavy. It began to shift. Once inside, he stood in the purple light bathing the doorway and breathed in through his nose, smelling smoke. Then he let go of the door and watched the glass begin to slip back towards the hole. This is how it seemed, like it was slipping. The hole belonged to this building he'd walked by 8 times in the last fortnight, but tonight was entering for the first, on a Friday night, way past 9 o'clock. Here he was a man without history. Nobody knew his profession, and this could be his kind of place. The man hitched up his jeans by the belt, and why not? Tomorrow night he'd be back on the couch complaining about the cold. His eyes adjusted to the lights. They were low enough to make his skin seem darker, but bright enough, perhaps, to show off the shirt he'd haggled for at the beach that morning. The shirt had a certain effect. It still had what his wife called that fresh from the designer sweatshop smell. If she'd seen his top 2 buttons undone, she'd have teased him, and the two of them would have kissed. As he thought this, the door finally closed behind him. Not too fast, not too slow. Just right, with an initial dignified steadiness, then something more like a crawl in the last moments. So no damage was done to wall, door, or persons close by. All this seemed appropriate. This was the high flyer brasserie. It simply wouldn't do to have doors close in a rush. The man stood in the light a moment longer. He'd not quite registered it yet, but this was, for some, the hottest hotspot in town, the place where well-groomed bartenders, chefs, and waiters gathered after a long week of serving others. Though small, the tourist industry was the primary industry here. Local elders complained it was now the only one. Anthony Bell, not the most perceptive sort, wouldn't notice this sort of thing, but the high flyer was where these hard-working people came, after working back-to-back double shifts, after days of bowing, grins fixed on their faces, hoping for disproportionate tips from those who'd not yet worked out the value of the currency, or were too rich to bother calculating it. Many spent 60 hours a week or more saying please and thank you in Italian, German, English, French, always making the effort to guess the customer's mother tongue and switch to it without comment, doing all this regardless of whether it was deserved, wanted, or noticed. Not that Anthony would even consider these sorts of details. He was already far off in his own thoughts, wondering mostly why he was experiencing the beginnings of an erection, very unusual for him in public. But the High Flyer Brasserie was very much the only venue where these workers from the food stalls and the town's endless tobacco stands, these children of quiet, religious men who'd grown up on these streets and now wore sunglasses at night as a statement directed at their fathers, this was the only place these people felt free. These people who shunned tradition and planned to spend their only day off in full-on rebellion, these were mostly young men, because in this town, the cooks, waiters, servers, and stall holders were nearly all young men. It was a young country. It was a male country. Anthony had seen this for himself during the last fortnight, which he'd spent mostly travelling between customers of his own, taking bulk orders from the big warehouses and corner shops and family businesses. As he joked to Cara on the phone earlier, apart from the odd wrinkly pensioner in head-to-foot white shawl, Anthony had hardly laid eyes on a female the whole trip, so he couldn't have played away if he'd wanted to. He moved forward a few steps. He picked up a drinks menu and scanned the contents. The prices in the High Flyer determined the clientele. Drinks were just about affordable for locals, being lower than the town's tourist bars, but higher than the average, giving what the American-born manager called an air of exclusivity, a unique space. The High Flyer was off the main track, somewhere locals whispered about, kept to themselves. It served beer, with alcohol in it. It was open till dawn, And, as Anthony was just noticing, it even hosted the occasional woman. Ones whose dresses showed flesh above the ankle and below the neck, who wore tight jeans, dresses and high heels, who smoked, laughed with confidence and drank with the men like they were staking a flag in newly discovered land, perhaps land they'd been inching towards for centuries. The bar area here had fluorescent pink lines underneath, which also suggested something new and exciting. These lines zipped around the outskirts of the service area and flew off, unafraid, into the distance, as if making a break for foreign shores. This place, with its English-only sign out front, understated private booths and Western channels on plasma TV screens, this place let local boys and girls play at being wealthy Westerners, ones who just so happened to prefer Arab music, who happened to sell shawarma and pizza by day. It let them be, for the night, Hollywood stars and New Jersey mafia dons. Each town waiter, now being waited upon, felt the weight of the beer bottle in his hand and surveyed the scene with satisfaction, imagining himself as a central character in a film with a dramatic, happy ending, set in a country he'd only experienced on DVD. Not that Anthony was even listening, but here, sons of fishmongers dropped words like babe and dude into their conversation. They modified their accents. The high flyer was far from the sober cafe culture that pervaded this town. This country, as they saw it, the sausage fest, plastic chair and table, coffee places on every corner, which only served espresso and shishas, and hosted men who hadn't had serious hopes in decades, who hated their leaders but never tried to change them. Between these walls, the only system belonged to a distant land. The seats felt soft to the touch. The blinds kept the outside world firmly out, or hid disapproving eyes looking in, and that was the way customers liked it. The high flyer preserved the illusion of being at the pulsing center of New York or LA right up until closing time. This was the management's unspoken promise. Anthony was aware he'd been standing for too long. He was keen to sit. He picked the closest table, one right by the door, but then he changed his mind, spotting a back corner booth with a view of the whole place. This looked like a spot for a successful businessman, someone taking some deserved me time after a day's serious work. So he strode over and sat, sliding his rucksack out of view in the same swift movement. Rucksacks were not welcome here, it was obvious. Even ones containing sales reports from recent days that Waleed would be very, very pleased with. Anthony looked around. This table had a clear view of 7 television screens running in tandem on silent, while to the right of the largest one, he could see 3 older men in good suits, deep in conversation. They looked different. They had bellies suggesting decades of success. Anthony straightened his back, stretched, and tried to work out what channel he was watching. He wondered whether these guys were the management. Then he thought, perhaps this was a brothel. Local music played through the speakers. To Anthony, it sounded like religious dance music, though he suggested this guess was based on a Westerner's prejudice. He slipped into that sometimes. He knew it. This sound, it certainly had the cadences of religious music, the instrumentation, the wandering lilt of the call to prayer he'd heard from his hotel room, wafting across the street from the mosque. Curiously, this perhaps religious song was being delivered by a man making no pretense of being able to actually sing, a man whose tone seemed to say, "This is just my job, mate. I could just as easily be an oven salesman." But people were nodding as if finding something delicious and wicked, and actually, Anthony noticed, it did have something of that to it. A lightness, perhaps, a darkness, a sound that hinted at something filthy going on somewhere close by. Thank you.